evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Guy Opperman. Thank you very much for coming. By all means, keep your phones on, turn your phones off. That's a matter for you. I have no fire exit drills or anything like that. If I start running, it's a bad news. And if we go out that door, I suspect you've got to follow me. I'm not going to do anything like that. We have about an hour and a half to talk through how it is we can get your communities match fit for the winter, more resilient in particular, so that they are able to cope with energy shocks, difficulties and disasters going forward. And we do this effectively 10 months after Storm Arwen. Many of you I have met in this hall as part of the 4 meetings we did in the spring of last year, of this year I should say, when we had meetings in Ponteland, Allendale, Hexham and Bellingham. And they were very well attended by people who were severely affected by Storm Arwen and who wanted to know how it is we can ensure that we are ready for future difficulties. And what we've spent the last 9 months doing is working with government, working with the regulator, working with Northern Power Grid, and working with the local authority, who run the Local Resilience Forum, to ensure that we think we have a way ahead. And there's a variety of things you're going to hear tonight as to how it is we have improved things, how it is we could help your individual parish council, your local community, your WI, your village hall, to be more prepared, basically. And I've got a variety of people who I'll do the quick introductions. So Dave is with me, who is from Northern Power Grid, and there are other people. So Dawn is over there, and these 2 good-looking lads are over here, are also from Northern Power Grid. And they are much more on the technical side and can answer specific technical questions. I've got Helen from the County Council, who is helping us particularly with the Local Resilience Forum and how it is that they run and control how you deal with difficulties and disasters under the Civil Emergencies Act of 2004, I think it is. And so let me just go back very quickly and say that when a disaster occurs, whatever it is, of any nature or form, the County Council are the lead organisation who bring together all of the various parties, whether it is police, fire, rescue, all of those organisations. We all know from Storm Arwen that worked reasonably well in some parts, but there were definite gaps. What we tried to do is learn the lessons of that, and there'll be various reports and observations. And what we've tried to do is to work with Northern Power Grid as to how it is we can get this done better. And the key thing is the establishment of a foundation with a significant amount of money. There's £7 million across the North East and Yorkshire, the area which NPG cover, of which there is well over £1 million available to Northumberland. And so there are various tranches of this, which Dave is going to explain in a bit more detail. But putting it bluntly, your application in the short term is from £0 to 20,000. That's the short-term application that you can do at the present stage. It does not rule you out at a future stage making a larger application. It's more complicated, it's more all singing and all dancing. But the blunt truth is what we are trying to do is to get to a situation that there will be sign-off, and in some cases installation, of all this new equipment to help you by the 26th of November. So within a year of Storm Arwen, there will be application, funding, sign-off, and hopefully installation of all these bits of kit. At the very least, we want to get the stuff signed off and agreed, so that you know, as a parish council, as a WI, as a village hall, as a local community group, you know that the stuff that you need is coming. The sort of things, you'll hear the different applications, and I'm going to invite particularly the team from Rochester to explain what your application is in a second, because yours is quite far advanced. You'll hear that the applications tend to be for things like generators, backup power, the capacity to store power and to store pieces of equipment to keep your ongoing power going. And then there's more fancy bits of kit that various people are applying for, whether it is solar panels or even showers in certain situations and other bits of kit that you'll hear about. There is already an existing scheme called Warm Hub, which some community areas, I think this hall itself is already part of Warm Hub, which is run by a variety of people, but it's basically, we're trying to take that and put that on another level so that when we have some difficulty or disaster in the future, we know that there are designated centres, frankly, wherever you are in the community. And the lesson learned from Storm Arwen, where people were out of power in some cases for as much as 14 days, is that despite the best efforts of police, county council, a lot of linesmen in desperate weather getting out there, in some cases you're going to have to fix your problems yourselves. It is not the case that in super rural Northumberland people can even get past the fallen trees that were down to get up to see you. And if we accept and acknowledge that, which we're going to have to in certain cases, even though we know help is on its way, albeit slowly, how do we fix that problem in the 1 to 7 to 14 day situation? And how do we create community hubs that are genuinely ready to deal with those particular difficulties? So that's what we're about. We've held 2 public meetings. This is the second one. We held one in Hexham on Monday night. And if I tell you that there were parish groups or community groups there from Allendale, Slaley, Humshalf, Hayden Bridge, Great Whittington, and 4 or 5 other places, Newbrough and other places as well, you'll see that all across the county, all across this community of Tynedale, people are applying for this and are trying to see how can we improve things for our local community. There are some great news. The first is, anybody who's ever worked for a parish council or has applied for a grant will know that it is death by paperwork. And that you, by the end of the application process, you want to stab yourself with a blunt fork. And that would be a relief by the time you've done the 48 pages and everything like that, and you're thinking, please, spare me ever doing this again. This is a 2-page form. It is really simple. Genuinely, I can tell you that Great Whittington, lovely man called Philip, there's some seats at the front if you want to come on down. We'll get some more seats, George, if we could, that'd be great. But there's a couple of seats just here. Lovely man called Philip from Great Whittington, very small parish council, very small village hall, put in an application 2 weeks and 3 days ago, and it was approved on Monday night for £4,000 worth of kit. That is how fast it is happening. And their assessments have already been made in relation to one of the applications in Bellingham that is ongoing, which we can talk about tonight. I know that we're going to talk about the Rochester application, and I want you to have, in a second, I'm going to ask you to explain what you've done, how you applied for it, and bluntly what your experience of this process was as well, because there's lots of people from different communities who are thinking, well, he says it's easy, but I'd quite like to hear from someone who's done it before I stick my head on the chopping block and go, yes, give me that form. But our experience is it's really simple, it's fairly basic stuff, and yes, you can do more all singing and more all dancing stuff in the future. We just want to make sure that you have the best opportunity to being fit and ready for this winter coming. All right? So I'm going to stop there. What you're going to hear from is these two, the team behind me here. A massive thanks to the MPG people for coming out. They don't have to do this. They have chosen to come out and to talk about what they're doing. And then Helen's going to talk about the sort of more what the regional organisation and the county council are doing. Dave, do you want to go?
Well, thank you very much for having us. I'm Dave Wilkins. I'm the External Affairs Manager at Northern Power Grid. Guy mentioned that we cover quite a range from up here in Northumberland down to Yorkshire. You can probably tell from my accent which part of that branch I'm from. So I've got a lovely drive home tonight, but I've got to say, you rolled out the welcome carpet for me because it was grim and dull in Durham, where I spent most of the day. Really worried about coming up here, and then look at the glorious sunshine when we got here. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to touch on 4 things. The main thing I will talk about is a foundation, but there's 3 other things that I do want to briefly touch on, but we will move through those. The first is just an update on where we are since our. You'll be aware, I'm sure, the various reviews and investigations and recommendations, particularly coming from Ofgem and Bays. There was a set of 67 actions, all due today. Interestingly, I can confirm that we've submitted all the response to all the actions were done in terms of submitting those actions. But what we also did alongside that was have our own improvement programme that went much further than that set of reports. There's a number of changes that we've made as an organisation that I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up on, really. The first one is it relates to our website and our telephone platforms. If any of you experienced it, they both got destroyed by Arwen just as much as our network. Really what happened was our website got hit with such a high volume of traffic it couldn't deal with it. That pushed people then to pick up the phone and call us, which then brought that one down as well. Neither platform could deal with the sheer volume that we'd seen. We'd never seen it before. Pleased to say, we've now replaced both systems. The website is, we did a stress test last week and the week before. It took 3 times the peak that we had in Arwen easily, and it's now a cloud-based system, so it should just be infinitely scalable. So that's a really positive change. Hopefully we never need that investment and that level of resilience, but let's not let wishful thinking lead us. Similarly with our telephony platform, branding platform opens up a whole range of capacity to us, much more resilient, so hopefully we shouldn't encounter the same problems, that falling over. Interestingly with that as well, we've got the thing where it's like a queuing system, so you're in the queue waiting to hear from us, but it'll say, if you want the queue, just press a number, hang up the phone, we'll call you back when you're placed in the queue. Comes up as well, so you have to sit there waiting for ages. Alongside that telephony platform, what we've also done is vastly expanded the group of people who can take your call, basically. So our call centre, our contact centre is in the process of recruitment, but similarly, what we've done is trained, and it's going to be about 400 colleagues within our organisation who aren't contact centre staff, but they're people like myself, who once we trigger a storm event or something like that, we kick into what we like to call internally like a second hat role. It's basically just a role we have during major incidents, and about 400 members of our team will be able to take your call. So suddenly that vastly improves the number of people who can take a call, like a platform that should be able to take your call. But hopefully you don't even ever need to ring us because the website gives you what you need and you can get everything you want through that. But that's 3 layers of resilience that are significant steps on since Storm Arwen. We've also expanded the fleet of generators that we had available. So we used generation extensively during Arwen. In areas like this though, it is always a challenge because of the geography and getting around the tight streets. But one thing that we have done is added 100 what we call wheelbarrow generators. So, and it literally, it's Ronseal, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a generator that you can wheel up to a house, hook it up, and that house has got power. And we've got 100 of those now. And 100 of those can actually take a day or two potentially off of a restoration event, because unsurprisingly, much of the end of a restoration event is a single property, and you're having to go around from travelling great distances to just tackle one property. These allow us to get those back on much earlier, and we can then address those in a more progressive manner, but the people in the property have got supply. Then also we're working with LRFs and other community groups and establishing community hubs, an agreed list of places that can be a formal hub known by us, known by LRFs, known by the community, that in an event, that's the place to go. That's going to be warm, there's going to be information there, there's going to be power, there's going to be facilities there. So again, agreeing and locking in that piece. And then finally, just locking in some partnerships around welfare support. So agreeing with food providers, agreeing other forms of welfare providers, and getting effectively a turnkey arrangement so that when we know that an event's coming, they're mobilised and they can provide food and support during the event. So quite significant changes that hopefully we will never need, but let's not live on in wishful thinking. Then probably the reason most of you are here tonight, you want to talk about the foundation. So off the back of Storm Arwen and the various reviews, there was a pot of £7.5 million set aside for this foundation. About 500k of that has already been shared with different community groups, and at this moment in time the particular focus is on energy resilience, and particularly for the areas most affected by Storm Arwen. So it's not actually formally launched yet. To the wider world it's not really available, but to the areas that were affected by Storm Arwen, we've done what we call a soft launch, but to you it's like a launch, where basically is get your applications in, let's get them reviewed, and let's get some funding so that your projects can get moving forward. We're engaging with various different groups across the patch to shape these with MPs and local authorities, and we'll be launching it formally later in the year. But right now, the news for you guys and for anyone else is get your applications in, and quite simply, let's get after it, because I think we're all in the same place that we want our communities to be more resilient. In terms of the sorts of the project and funding opportunities that are available, it's what you would expect, and many of you, if you're going through the process, are probably already playing in this space. It's looking at energy resilience during major events. That's definitely where we are at the moment. Our headspace is absolutely in thinking about winter preparedness, making sure that our communities are resilient. but also it will exist beyond that. It'll look at vulnerability, fuel poverty. We're quite keen to be making sure we're supporting the investment in levelling up across the rural divide. We're looking at innovation, other forms of social support, collaboration between different forms of community groups to look at innovative projects and things that we can do, as well as partnering with charities. So at the moment, while it is quite tightly ring-fenced around the sort of things that we're looking at so that we can get resilience projects going forward, it will be, we hope, a real force for good in all of our communities in a variety of ways. And as Guy said, just because you've applied for one thing in one way for one amount of money doesn't stop you applying for something else, doesn't stop you applying for something big. So again, encouragement is, as I'm sure Guy will encourage you towards, is get it filled in, get it in, and let's get cracking after it. The project examples we're currently looking at, and Guy touched on it, is generated with parish councils, it's other forms of generation, low carbon generation. The real win is if there's a sustainable solution to a resilience project. That's a really, really rich vein of exploration that we should be looking at, as well as really just looking at building community centres as well. So in some areas we've provided showers, as Guy said. It's not necessarily been that we've been looking at wholesale technical solutions. It's just been making sure some funds are available to finish off projects that organisations have already largely been running with. As Guy already touched on, at the moment it's £1,000 to £20,000 supporting a variety of different groups. We'll be looking at that twice a year once we're formally launched, so there'll be 2 application tranches. And really, we don't want to be any applications to run beyond 3 months. Ideally, it'd be much quicker than that, and I would hope that some of you experience it much quicker than that. And we're really looking at matched or additional funding. It's not necessarily that we're looking to wholly fund projects going forward. We like to partner and match funding and apply additional funding. But again, every application is going to be different within different parameters, and we'll welcome the conversation. We'll welcome the dialogue to look at innovative solutions with you. And all of the applications, we're looking for MP support, local authority support, LRF support. By the way, we're not seeing much problem in getting that support from those parties. So again, I don't think that should slow the process. I just think it pushes some wind in the sails, if I'm being honest. But we do want all of those parties to be involved in it, so that when it comes to a major event, we all know where these resilient hubs are. We all know what the direction of travel is. And then once the foundation is launched formally, applications can be done online as well. So if you're scribbling in paper and all that sort of stuff, we'll be getting it done electronically. And finally and quickly, we can't stand up at an event in a place like this and not touch on our priority services membership. If you or anyone that you know of would benefit from being on our priority service membership, give us your details, sign up for it online.
Some forms here, if anybody wants to register today or take the form to
There
do
you go.
you can do it online as well.
So you can do it online, you can take some forms with you. But one of the biggest issues we have in an event is customer contact details. And if you haven't got your details, we can't necessarily provide the services that we could provide, or we won't know that you're there needing them. So please get some information, get some merchants of telephones if you need it as well, but please, priority services membership, tell your friends and family. You can nominate and put forward other people as well, so please get signed up, give us your information, and let us put in place the procedures and policies to make sure that you and or people in your community will benefit from it, get the support that they need. And then finally, alongside that, we have a lot of fuel poverty partnerships. So we work with organisations like Green Doctors and Citizens Advice, and simply, this is a time of great challenge and difficulty for many people around the UK, and particularly within our region. Lots of people need a lot of help, and we partner with organisations that are able to provide that help. So again, please reach out to us. Don't leave without talking to us about that if you think there's something we can do. Or again, in your communities, in your local areas, if there's something we or a partner of ours can do, either around areas of vulnerability or just fuel poverty and people just dealing with the situation economically that we're in right now, which is challenging for so many people, please get in touch, please reach out to us. If there's anything you can take away from it at the end, please do. But it exists there to support you. So with that, I think I'll hand back, but I'm going to be sticking around before I head back to Yorkshire. Ask us anything, and
Cool.
catch before we go.
Thank you very much indeed. So, you met Dawn, who, stand up and wave, Dawn.
Hi.
So, she is looking after a variety of things and has got these, which are the very, do you want to wave a phone? Do you want to explain?
Just a few left because we have given some out already, but these are corded, what we call corded phones, so they simply run off the voltage that comes from your BT line. Don't have any fancy things, don't have an answer board or anything like that. Just plug it into the BT line. It doesn't need to be connected to the electricity supply, so it's ideal for being able to still use the telephone if there is a power cut. If your phone is a little bit already a bit more fancier than this and needs to be plugged in the socket.
There is, and there are a whole bunch of those available. There are also going to be more coming, and various parish councils can also ask for them, and we'll sort it out. Can I just say that there's a lot of information. If you're thinking, God, I can't write all this down, it's this is being recorded, and you can then watch it back on in the future to go who said what. You also have an opportunity if you go to my website, gartman.co.uk, the application form that you're interested in. There's paper copies on Dawn's table, so you can leave with one of those. But also, there's copies on my website as well, which you can download, print off, and take it from there. But she will give you.
And if anybody wants to have a chat about it, I can take your email address and someone will get in touch with you. Just have like a little 20-minute phone call.
Yep.
Talk you through things.
And we'll all stick around at the end of this meeting so you can have a longer chat and go, can I just understand this? Sorry for asking a stupid question, but etc. etc. So no one's going to go anywhere straight away. I'm going to come to the Local Resilience Forum in a second. As I say, Dave and Chris are going to answer any technical questions you've got, and you're perfectly entitled to ask. Northern Power Grid, you know, given all the reports, have they upgraded their machinery? Have they done various bits and bobs? We're not doing much on that, but they're available if you want to ask them any questions on that, and you know, we're all here to try and assist in whatever way we can. I'm going to touch on a bit on phone lines in a second, because copper wire phone lines is something we campaigned on a huge amount, and there's a lot that we are doing. But I'm going to let Helen come in and talk about what the Local Resilience Forum is, kind of where you are and where we're trying to take things forward. Do you want to go from there?
So I'm Helen Hines. I'm the Business Resilience and Emergency Planning Lead for Northumberland County Council, which basically means I manage a small team of officers. It's called the Civil Contingencies Team, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we're delivering the duties under the Civil Contingencies Act from 2004, which Guy mentioned earlier. Part of that requires us to work in partnership with something called the Local Resilience Forum, which is mentioned a few times. They are based on a police force boundary, so for the one that covers Northumbria, there are 6 local authorities, including ourselves. So we've got Northumberland, lovely big rural local authority, and then we've got the 5 tiny, we're much more urban central local authorities down in the south there. I used to work for Newcastle. We worked for Newcastle City Council for 13 years. I was in post with Northumberland for 6 weeks when Arwen hit. So it was a very steep learning curve for me for about rural Northumberland and the amazing work that the communities do in rural Northumberland. But I've spent the last, nearly 2 weeks off, I think, my first year anniversary. Can I have a card, please, Guy?
Yeah, of course.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry. So Storm Arwen, it was an incredible event, very difficult to deal with for everybody involved. In the years that I've worked within the resilience field, it's the first time I've ever dealt with a red wind warning, and it was the first time that Northumberland had experienced something with a red wind warning as well. So I spent the last kind of 9 months, 12 months working on the recommendations. We, as a local authority, commissioned a review into how we responded. That's available publicly alongside other reports that came out about Storm Arwen, and there were some really key recommendations in there, which included working with our colleagues from the utility companies. So we work really closely with MPG. We always have, but I think that working relationship has got even closer over the last 12 months or so. And we're also working with other utilities, NWL being one of them, and also Scottish Power Energy Networks. Just on the point about the Priority Service Register, it's worth knowing that you can do that for all utility companies as well. It's not just the electricity company. So you can also register with gas and water, and you do have to do it with, I think you still have to do it individually with each one, don't you? We're also, one of the other big recommendations was to work with our communities. So we've been, we already had a of pre-nominated buildings across our communities. And that's something that my team has held and has developed over a number of years. And you will hear people talk about rest centres a lot. Rest centres have got a very particular term, and it's generally where we open a building, like a leisure centre, and we provide facilities for people to stay overnight. For our win, we actually needed to adapt our response, and we were actually looking at using buildings that were at the centre of the community as somewhere that was a safe place for people to go and get information, get hot drinks, be that through gas or backup generator, real fires. And we know that our communities really stepped up and really helped those people out there who they knew were in trouble and knew that they needed that assistance. But what we have also done in the last 12 months or so is we've been working with parish councils and other community groups. So I've learned, particularly this week, I talk about parish councils and I use it as a shorthand to mean the community, and I realise that that's actually not correct. So I will work with anybody in the community who wants to look at how they can make their community more resilient. But what we've really been trying to do is help you think about how you can develop a plan in the event that something happens within your community and you need to maybe come together before we get there. Because as Guy said, if something as widespread as Arwen, it's quite difficult for us to actually be able to manage that across the whole of Northumberland. So what we then ask people to do is think about, we talk about taking an asset-based approach, so that basically means what have you already got in your communities that you can lever in the event of an incident. So that might be a building, we've got a wonderful facility here. You might not have a building in your community. I've spoken to some communities that haven't, but have you got community groups? Have you got links with buildings in neighbouring communities? What is it that you've got that's positive that you can then build on and work on and develop? It might be you've got a sports centre, sports group, something like that. And we know that they exist because we saw them pop up through COVID as well, didn't we? How many community groups were established because they were helping their neighbours? What we also know is the work that we're doing on community resilience and community resilience response hubs overlaps with existing work that already exists. So we know about the warm hubs that Community Action Northumberland have developed, and they've been around, I thought they've been around since 2019, they've actually been around for longer. I think they've been around since about 2016. And it's a fabulous network, but it's actually quite formal, and you enter into a contractual agreement with CAN, and they help you when you open the building, you agree to have the building open, and they have refreshments and they'll have activities on, and it's somewhere that people can go to get help and advice. We also now have within Northumberland, we've just set up a new initiative around warm spaces and places, which is about existing community facilities that already open their doors. So libraries are a good example of that. But there are also community groups that put on coffee mornings. So those have been, we are now registering those, or my colleagues in Northumberland communities together are working on that. So what we need to do is make sure that we're joining all of that up. So the work that I'm doing is looking at buildings, facilities, networks that can be activated in the event that something goes wrong. So it's a reactive type of approach. CAN and Northumberland communities together are looking much more at the proactive things that are already happening and networks there, but we need to make sure that those are closely aligned. Internally, we've been looking at our plans and procedures, and we're also been looking at doing some exercising and testing our structures as well in the coming weeks. So it's been an ongoing learning curve, but the most important thing to me has been definitely working in the community, and it's been a privilege to work and talk to so many enthusiastic community members who are teaching me an awful lot about Northumberland, which is obviously what I need to know.
Okay, thank you so much indeed. So we'll go to questions in a second. I'm just going to make a sort of 3 or 4 key points. The first is you may be listening and thinking, well, we can only have one hub in my village or my community. Bellingham's a good example. Utter nonsense. You can have 2 in this particular village, or 3 if necessary. You've got to be able to make it work. The applications have got to go in, but it's absolutely the case that your community can have more than one. All right. That particularly applies for super rural areas. And if I give you a good example in what I call South Tyndale, but that's obviously Allendale and Allen Heads are the main spine of that. But there's the East and West Allen valleys, and there are large communities. A large community spread over literally about 100 square miles plus, and there are little communities like Mohope, Carry Coats, Nine Banks, various other places that are all along there that are just tiny, tiny places. And those particular places are making individual applications because, as they showed in Ireland, they just simply couldn't get over the hill, or they couldn't get out the valley. And it particularly applies where you have farming communities as well. So in Slaley and Allendale, for example, all the water is powered by electricity, so it has to be pumped up because there isn't natural water that flows. So Northumbrian Water, their power backed off, they turned off after about a day and a half. Their battery backup was about a day, so they were in just as much difficulty, and they were struggling to be able to, a cow takes about 10 gallons a day of water. You can imagine the difficulties. So we're looking at how the NFU and farming communities and the individual parts of the NFU can be making applications just as much as your village hall can be or your WI can be. So you can have multiple applications is the first thing. The second is you can have different types of applications depending on the community you represent. The third will be that the wider network does matter. And I just want to touch on that because County Council did a great job in Ireland on people who were registered with them, particularly those who are part of what you and I would call social services. People who get regular visits from someone in the NHS in various shapes or form or the care facilities, right? If you are getting your 15, 30, 1 hour visits, whatever it is per day, you're on the county list, they know you're vulnerable, and they will get somebody to see that person because they're clearly vulnerable. Where it got more complicated, 14 days in, is people who were not on that list, but were elderly, needed, for example, several people. We had several people stuck upstairs because their stair lift couldn't work because there's no electricity for the stair lift. People who genuinely struggled who were post-operative. We had no list of who is post-operative and therefore can't move around without assistance and needs to have assistance on an ongoing basis. That's where having someone in your community, particularly if it's a small community, who knows the people who are actually in difficulties or who would struggle in those circumstances, are particularly the people who should be applying to Dawn, who are not naturally vulnerable, as you and I would class them, but they would be vulnerable if power goes off for 2 days. And that really does matter because they go onto priority lists, we can get people to go and see them, we can get army people out to go and see them and hike across fields with food. There's a lot of stuff we can do if things go wrong. But without that knowledge, it is really difficult. So there is a genuine ask of all of you to identify and have a running ledger, for want of a better word, in your particular isolated communities. Who are the people who, if the power goes, would really struggle, even though they're not on a care list? You and I all know 85-year-olds who are fit as a fiddle and going strong, but wouldn't necessarily be able to go up the stairs without a stair. Now, that's the sort of people who we really need to be thinking out for, and that's where, in my view, Tyndale and the Upper North Tyne really kicks in because we're so good at that sort of stuff. We just hadn't got that list when we were going forward, which is why we got into some difficulties with some people. That's why the wider network does matter. I'm going to ask, so we've got representatives, and apologies if I've missed you or some people arrived late, but we've got people here from, obviously, multiple representatives from Bellingham, Rochester, Falstone, Birtley, Kielder, Stonehalf, and various other places in between. And welcome to Alan, the County Councillor from Hayden Bridge, and Hadrian, who represents a variety of parish councils. John Riddle can't be with us tonight, he was at one of the previous events, but sends his apologies. And I know that there's various parish council representatives, I won't go through all of you, who represent individual bits and things like that. But I do want to hear, so there have been 5 applications so far made in Tyndale. As I say, Slaley, Great Whittington, Rochester, Bellingham and Stocksfield. But David is here, who has, I think, been running the application from Rochester. And so can you just come forward, explain what when you put it in, how complicated it was, what you've applied for, because you've got the first-hand knowledge.
Right, okay. My name is David, I'm from Rochester. As Guy said, we filled in the application for funding, which Guy has at the moment. As far as the complexity of it, it's quite straightforward. both Susan and I worked on it, and as far as other applications go for previous funding, it was reasonably straightforward. And I have to say that it actually didn't take as long as what I thought it was. I do have a copy here, which I brought just in case anybody was interested. And basically, it's just, why do you want it? What does it do for the community? And how do you want to use the funding? As in our community, we have a village hall and a pub. And that's it, that's the village. So, as far as I'm concerned, the village hall, in conjunction with this funding, is something very important because we have no other, we don't have another community centre, we don't have another community hall, and to us, after the experience of last time, it was necessary to get this form filled in as soon as possible. And to me, because I filled in loads of other applications on different scenarios, was quite straightforward. And,
can you tell us, what have you put in for? What are the 3 or 4 things you've asked for?
Right, well, initially, the main thrust of the village hall, obviously, is resilience. At the moment, the hall operates unless the lights go out, then it doesn't function. So the first main criteria is to have means to run the hall when there's no power. So that's the first criteria. Secondary is backup batteries if something else goes wrong. What we have done at the moment, in order to get the first criteria, we now have installed switchover gear, but we've undertaken that ourselves because that's necessary. So the first criteria is that if, for instance, something happened a fortnight's time, we could have a generator and plug it in and the hall would function. And as far as the village is concerned, that is somewhere important where somebody can go. Because there's a lot of houses and stock in Rochester which is now all electric. So if the power goes down, they have absolutely nothing. They have no heat, no power, no lights, no food, nothing. So it's, Susan and I, we've worked in conjunction this for the past 10 months or so, and we feel that that's the direction we're going at the minute. As I said before, I have got a completed form here.
And I think you put in for about 16 grand's worth of kit?
No, the whole lot.
18.
Okay. 18.
It was 18.
Yeah.
Okay, 18.
18,
Oh.
yeah.
So, and the good news is,
Well, the good news is you got it. You won.
Wonderful!
so the assessment was, so there's 2 assessments being done today. I know you met Bellingham today,
Yes.
and I'm loving it. I feel like I'm in the Oscars. It's great. So, well, you said it's your.
Well, we know that you're putting for 18. We know you've been speaking to our guys, and £16.9 thousand coming your way. We just got to run it through the process to get it. So, great job.
Could I just a small aside, when I talked about the switchover gear, I had a very, very frustrating 2 or 3 months trying to get EDF to come out and pull the fuses, and it was thanks to you that
I
we
know,
shifted. And within a fortnight or so, we actually had a booking for EDF to come out to pull the fuses so we could put the gear in.
They're not necessarily the greatest, but let's not go
Sorry.
there.
We need to thank you for that.
No, fine,
Because
fine.
it wouldn't have happened
The
without your
key bit, I mean, it's fun doing, and the nominations are, and here's the winner. But the key bit is, give us an idea, when did you apply? Because that's the, for these guys, that's the really.
When
Was it August?
I think it was August, yeah.
I think you'll find it's I've got your application, I left it on the kitchen table very impressively. But I think you'll find it about the 28th of August.
It was about 28th of
So my point is, within a month, the application goes in, it's been assessed, and it's been signed off. Great Whittington was only, there's no doubt, smaller applications are easier. There's no doubt. Once you get above £5,000, £10,000, these guys have got to do a bit more checking. But Great Whittington did £4,000, the application was 2 weeks, and then it's turned around and was successful. Great. Anyway, listen. Well done and many thanks. He's available for questioning as is later on. If you want to do. I'm sorry. The bad news is for those of you who are representing the Bellingham application, that hasn't been signed off yet. But I think you guys saw them all today, didn't you?
Yes, so Helen and Ian, I believe, spoke with some of your representatives today. Very, very warm conversation. I think it's a great project, looks very positive. So, again, another really good one. Not going to say too much too soon, but looking good.
So, and I want to try and touch on some of the other bits and bobs in the application. So, the obvious thing is backup power. That is because everything runs off electricity. You lose the electricity, everything goes off. So that's the thing I suggest you all focus on. The capacity to then plug in backup power. I'll come to you just 1 second. I'll just mention the Slaley application because I think it's a really good application. And the nice lady Stella Douglas, I think is her surname, who is one of the parish clerks from Slaley, put it in, and they included an application for a shower. I have to say, when I saw it, I thought, why are you doing that? Then I realised the simple fact is the entirety of the village can't have a shower. And so, slowly but surely, everyone was desperate to basically find a farmer with a generator so they could go and have a shower, even if it's once every 4 days. It's a really good application, and I suspect what will happen is that lots of people will put those things in, and it is a totally logical, natural extension that there is one hub in the village where you can have a wash. For some people it'll be quite important because they have to keep clean for dressings and things like that. You know, particularly with very conscious of what I call the people who are post-operative. There were lots and lots of people who were discharged from Hexham Hospital or Cramlington Hospital or Carlisle Hospital who'd had a perfectly normal broken leg that was fixed up, or they had a hip replacement or something like that. But being looked after afterwards was really complicated, and those people need to be looked after in a particular way, way above what we need to be looked after when we're fit and healthy. So that gives you a bit of a flavour. I'm delighted that David, I did know that you got it when we arrived tonight. So I'm going to take a bunch of questions, and obviously everyone's available for everything. Like lady at the back who is from Stonehearth.
Yes,
Brenda.
Just one thing, when you do the application, do you have to have the amount for the generator, or do you, because people all apply for these generators for village halls, do you have a company that you could go to? That's my main question.
Yep.
And the same if it was a shower that was going into our village hall, because our village hall is run, yes, by electric, but it's a pellet boiler, and the pellet boiler takes a ton, and it lasts 3 weeks, and that's now gone up to £730 a ton.
I know.
You know, that's a lot of money.
So let me explain. The application is here. If you literally reach across to your left, Dawn will pass you one. I think my experience is the more complex the ask, the more complicated it is. It takes a bit longer, putting it bluntly. So showers and things like that, there's a proper process that goes through.
Yeah.
If you're just asking for a generator and things like that, most of those, there's a reasonable ballpark figure that everybody can do, that you and I could go to Forest and Garden in Hexham, speak to Gregor, who runs it, and say, how much for a generator to run my village hall? And it's not too difficult to say, well, that'll be somewhere between £250 and £1,000, but you need the following bits of kit to go with it. So you do not need really detailed quotes at the present stage. So you don't need someone to come out and do a mega quote. Slightly, the assessment is done by these guys. That's why this is working well, because frankly, they are doing an awful lot of these across County Durham, Northumberland, North Yorkshire, touching into a tiny bit of Cumbria as well. And I think that's a fair description of it. The more you can give in terms of specifics, it's not a blank check, and to pretend otherwise would be naive, but it is a pretty basic form. I think what you've had a good steer tonight as well, that the fact, for example, you're going on a pellet boiler is a good thing because that's sustainable, even though at the moment, because Mr. Putin and various other things have made it more complicated and energy prices have gone through the roof. So there's a whole bunch of issues on that. But there's about 10 different criteria, and you can pretty much hang your hat on anything here. I mean, we are talking obviously energy resilience, that's easy. We're talking energy safety, fuel poverty, vulnerable persons. Every community has vulnerable persons. If you are looking after vulnerable people, that community can apply for funding for this. You've got even community development and supplementable community support services. These are very broad brush stuff. It is very focused at the moment on energy, and we're making it about that as well, because frankly, there's lots of stuff I'd love to do for all your village halls, but what I really want to do is I do not want a situation where we have an extreme weather event of whatever shape or form, and we have communities that we're scrabbling. I literally bought 100 generators last year. and supplied them to some of you who are here. And Gregor is a man I know really well because I was in for about 50 grand's worth of generators, and all I had was a one-line email saying, yes, we will cover your generators. But I was running quite a big line of credit with Forest and Garden, which by the end I was extraordinarily nervous that I wasn't going to get supported. Eventually his bill was paid by NPG because we made the case that that was providing emergency power. But we did buy an awful lot of generators.
So they're still sitting there?
Sorry?
Do you have to pay it back, or do you just have them still sitting there?
No. Listen, they rented them effectively for a period of time, and then some people have bought them though. Some communities, and speak to most farmers. Most farmers will have a backup generator. If you live in Slaley or the Allen Valley, you definitely have one because your water is utterly dependent upon water being pumped, and there's a whole bunch of stuff they need. They can't, if you've got cows need milking, you have to be able to run your milking parlour. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So most farmers would have a pretty tatty, not very safe, you certainly wouldn't want to go near it, with some pretty dodgy diesel in the corner. Most farmers would run a generator, but slightly, here's the truth. All of our parents and grandparents would have had a stock of candles, an emergency supplies of very dodgy baked beans and other food that you can possibly dig out, and you'd probably have a little baby stove. You'd be stunned and amazed how many people are now doing that because they're suddenly going, we have taken all of this for granted for so long. I'm going to have a box that is my emergency box, and if I have to do it, at the very least, I'm going to have a torch with lots of batteries, which Lord knows lots of us have not kept that going. So that's what we're trying to do. You don't need absolute precision on your application, and start a conversation is my view. Because the beauty of this, and maybe we haven't explained this very well, this hasn't even launched yet. So we're in what is called a soft launch, but because two communities basically, Northumberland as a whole, but particularly Tynedale, a little bit of Ponteland, some very specific parts of Ponteland, and also North Northumberland, and then separately down in towards Weardale. Those are the two communities that are really affected, all right? And those two communities are effectively being treated like a soft launch, partly because we're learning, people like me, but more importantly, these guys are learning how it is this can work, what will work, and slightly, he's going to hold a bunch of further meetings with a bunch of other local communities over the next few months to understand how we're going to do this, and working out what it is the community needs, how you do it. I suspect they'll be able to do a bunch of suppliers on an ongoing basis. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Yes, sir, you had a question. You had your hand up. Did you have your hand up earlier on? Gentleman there. Yes?
It was communications.
Yes.
What can you do for communications both within the village and to the power units and yourselves?
So there is, I'll touch on BT in a second. There is a, I've got to put this delicately, there's no good way to put it. The NPG communications originally were woeful. Their whole thing's crashed. They gave really bad comms to the local communities. All of us got told it'll be fixed tomorrow, and then tomorrow again, and then tomorrow again. Their own people, I've been to see it, they have an emergency crisis room. They couldn't get the people into the emergency crisis room because those people are stuck at home behind a bunch of fallen trees as well. That is now being fixed, to be fair to them. So I think they are way better prepared as an organisation. How are we better prepared? So we still require electricity for most stuff. We lost a variety of phone masts as well. So if you go to Cinderhope and Sparty Lee down in the Allen Valleys, they lost a phone mast. We lost one up this part of the world as well, north of Bellingham. The wind took out lots of bits of infrastructure and kit, not just power lines. I think there's a couple of things. So BT were going to be getting rid of the copper line, okay? We stopped that. So we went to see BT, we went to see the regulator, we went to see the government department, and BT have stopped the process of getting rid of copper lines. I don't think that will last forever. So I think, part of the thing that we've been trying to do is that all of us for years have been saying, I really want a better phone signal, I really want mobile coverage, and I really want better internet coverage. And the way to do that is to switch to a non-copper line first. The difficulty is, as we discovered in Stormarwen, the communications, if you don't have a landline, are really, really difficult. Now, even with a landline, if that landline goes down, we lost plenty of that as well. So we've kept that for the moment. You're then looking at alternative versions, these sort of phones. You're looking at Forestry Commission. If Alex was here, he came here last year when he was doing the, we did this meeting last year, he would tell you that the Forestry Commission, who are probably the most match-fit organisation for extreme weather, they couldn't talk to each other either. They're now going back to radios. They're now getting themselves organised in a different way as well. All their comms broken down. So every single public service was struggling. And so every single organisation, it's not just MPG, it's not just BT, Northumbrian Water, the police, the Forestry Commission. They're all looking at their comms. At the very least, they're all looking at backup comms. So we're all talking about it as parish councils, as individuals, as householders. Trust me, the Forestry Commission, the police, all of these people are looking at how they're going to do it. There's one final thing, which is there is an emergency radio capacity here. So you know that all across North Tynedale and all across this area, there are certain masts, which are radio masts. They're not for general usage, okay? So they're for usage if Mr. Putin gets even more madder and decides to invade, and then the army and the police and the emergency services have the capacity to communicate in extreme circumstances. We looked at and tried to persuade them that in a emergency situation we could try and use those. Their answer to that was no, and fairly a robust no, partly because it's the same problem we're trying to use the army. When you say to the army, we'd really like you to help, they go, we're not actually the 4th emergency service. We will help if we're genuinely able to do so, but that's not really what our job is. This is the local resilience forum. Unless they really say that they need those people, they won't come in. So kind of on comms, everybody is reviewing what they're trying to do. Sorry, you come on.
Yeah, the thing is, there was food delivered to the village, but there was no way of telling anybody in the village that the food was there. It was stood at the garage.
So let me explain on that. So here's the thing. So it's slightly as Helen was saying, there are places of respite. MPG organised certain bits of food, wasn't coordinated, okay? And lots of people couldn't get through, and various people didn't know about this. Here's the other problem. The only way that we were able to get communications is by hand, genuinely, people going around and saying, this will be coming to your village at this time. What we're trying to create is what you call an Excel spreadsheet or a blueprint, is all across this community, right? There are well over 50 emergency hubs of various shapes or form. Some are very all singing or dancing, so in Hexham, the leisure centre has got, you know, you can get 100 people sleeping if you need to do, etc., etc. Others are tiny little village halls where you're not going to get 100 people sleeping, okay? What we need is a plan and an ability that you know where any food that's coming, where it's going to go to. Who is the designated person in that community who is going to try and be the point man for that? Who in the parish council is the person who the local authority ring up or contact and say, as I understand it, you're in charge. So some communities, if I give you an example of Akeham's, a good example. Akeham's got flooded in the past many times. They have an amazingly good flood group. And the flood group always have someone on duty. They always have somebody who's watching the river. They always are in a position that they know exactly who's doing what at any particular stage, and they know who to contact. That's what we have to try and get ready to do. And that's the way in which we're going to do it. It's the only way to do it. There's also, because it's all very well saying, we'll get food for the village, but if we haven't been able to communicate to 500 people around, it's really difficult. But at the very least, we're going to know, well, where's the food going to go? Into which particular village hall? Where are we going to try and have people? You know, we didn't even know these halls are going to be able to be kept open, because of course there's no power. Once we know we've got a hub, we can then work around it. These guys and these guys can then get food to places. That's the plan. It's a work in progress, though. It really is. And I might say, for example, the further up the valley I go to Tarset, to Lanehead, to Greenhalf, to Stannersburn, Fallstone, all the various pockets up the valley, it's not enough to say to them, pop up to Kielder, because you're not going to be popping up to Kielder if there's 10 trees down. It's just they have to have a designated hub as locally as you possibly can. That's not going to be as big and as impressive as others, though. The lady here first, and then I'll come to the two of you.
I was just going to ask about copper wire. Ours is already gone, so all we've got is the internet and the telephone coming through the fibre. So we were in a position where we had no communication. The only way of getting out of
So it's something that I'm going to get Helen to talk about because it's really difficult. It is really, really, really difficult. So we are trying to hang on to as much of the copper wire as we can, but at the same stage, I also want people to be able to work from home and run a business on proper Wi-Fi and things like that. It's a work in progress is the best description, but it's not going to be the case that everybody is going to have access to a landline on an ongoing basis on copper wire. And even if, and in loads of communities, they lost the landline anyway because the telephone pole was taken down. So we're working on it. I'll come to Helen to wrap up a few points in a second.
Seems to me that your idea of going by hand, on horseback if necessary perhaps, to basically have a list of all those properties which are affected like this, because they're not going to put the copper wire back, are they?
No.
We would be in exactly the same position.
So my hope is, and this is definitely happening in some parishes, individual communities are working out, all right, where's our hub? Who are the people who are vulnerable? Who would really struggle if they couldn't get out? And how is it we're going to work this? It's relatively easy in Bellingham because self-evidently this is quite a small enclosed community, everyone can walk from A to B. It's way harder out in the sticks, we all get that. So it's a work in progress, but that's slightly where we hope parish councils will stick their hand up and say, I can actually say this, everyone's got a copy, you can get a copy of the electoral roll, you can get a map of the area, we can work it through. I'll take David, then I'll take you, David. So yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say,
I'll come to you in a second.
which I did touch on, about the backup generate and things like that. We are in the process of getting an internet connection because we don't have one at the minute, but it's going to be copper wire. But we don't have anything, we're not connected yet, but we're in the process of getting it connected. And the other thing is that we're also registered as a crisis centre for our area with Nigel Fisher.
Yes, member of my team.
So we're on the crisis register, but in my view, obviously, we're not a crisis centre until we get the backup facilities to make it work.
But you are a crisis centre now, it's just not a crisis centre if the power goes.
Exactly.
That's what we've got to fix.
That's right, yeah. Which is
I'll take the next other David, and then I'll take the next two going back.
Sorry, I'm going to take a little time, but I think it convinced us that a generator in the village hall would be very sensible for a small community, and I think we'll, my colleague will be very much looking to think that's sensible. But I'd like to just really move on, just change the topic to the technical side of things, if I may, because I know there's two gentlemen here on the technical side. We seem to be starting from the premise that following a severe storm, extended power cuts for towns and villages is acceptable. This is where we seem to be starting from.
It's not the case, but we'll address that.
Because we're making all these provisions, we think that it's the norm that we're going to get long power cuts. I would like to suggest we should reduce the likelihood of this happening. And in order to do this, I think we should ask Power Grid to give us a breakdown of the high voltage, the causes of the high voltage faults. Because, faults on wood pole lines, 20 kV, 22 kV, whatever they are now, 11 kV if that's what they are. Because I think that the higher voltage lines, the 66 and the 275 kV, weren't affected by Storm Arwen to the same degree as our distribution lines in the valley. So if the steel tower lines, pylons, whatever you call them, can withstand it, we would be working, So I suspect the majority of the faults, were caused by fallen trees. I suspect. I haven't read any statistics. I don't know. This is the first meeting I've been in. But this is my suspicion. This results, obviously, in work to clear the trees before you can start mending the line. So it's going to take a long time. But if this is the case, I would like to suggest that we ensure that trees on our distribution lines are cleared from falling distance from the lines, so that obviously then the repair time for faults is purely repairing a pole that might have broken, or the conductors which have come off the insulators, so that you're reducing the repair times outages less than 24 hours on high voltage, I'm talking about the 20 kV system around here, should be a rarity rather than the norm for longer than 24 hours. So I think they should be very rare, even in Storm Arwen. This is what I'm saying. So I would like to know if there's 7 million being put into strengthening the lines and felling the trees.
Okay, all right, I'll answer some of those questions, and I'll pass it over to these guys as well. And my suggestion is you take a longer period of time to have a proper discussion about this, because there's a lot of nuts and bolts in that.
Yeah,
The first
well, I'm
is,
sure there are.
no, but the first is there are 3 separate reports on Storm Arwen done by the County Council, well, 4, including myself, the County Council, myself, the regulator, who are utterly independent, and the Department of Business. Have a look at those, because there's a lot of detail in those. The second bit would be, yes, indeed, many of the problems were by fallen trees, but there was also a phenomenal amount of differential by the reason the way the wind was going in a different direction. And genuinely, it is still the case, and it will be the case for years to come, that the number of trees, which is well over 1 million trees in our area, just even around where I live, there's over 300 still down. There is, bottom line is this, there has been no storm like this for at least 40 years. Nobody wants, in any way, this to be a regular occurrence. And no one is planning for that. And there is, you know, MPG, if you go to their accounts, they will tell you how much money they've spent on upgrading the system. It's about £60 million over a very period of time. And these guys can give you more detail about that. The bottom line is this, is I want to be ready whatever comes. Now, you can argue this is climate change. You can argue this is just a beast from the east and a beast from the north in this case, with particularly bad wind that was never been seen before in this valley for the last 40 years. And genuinely, that is the practical reality. And there's a whole host of differing ways that you could look at this. Different bits were affected in different ways. We even lost undersoil power in various cases as well. So Ponteland, most of it's underground, that all went as well for a whole bunch of reasons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys to give the sort of 2 or 3 minute answers to that, and then I'm going to let David and yourself have a proper discussion, because that's a 15 to 20 minute discussion later on. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, well, I mean, basically the 275-132 is steel tower structures.
Yes.
Some 66 runs of steel tower structures as well, but also some of our older 66 run on what we call an age code arrangement. Now, obviously, there's not as much 66 275 as there is in 20. You are 20 up here, you're correct, you know, so this once you get out into the, well, we've got it, it's all 20 kV, single pole structures, we have got the odd H pole. There's not as much 66 and 275, so obviously, because they just feed into the primary, and then from the primary,
But they didn't come down, you see, that's what I'm saying.
no, but to be quite honest, if we had had a big tree came down on, they would have come down. Yeah.
But they're designed such that trees don't fall, they're far
Well,
away from the falling distance.
I mean, you,
Anyway, we'll have this discussion.
yeah, well, I can explain to you sort of more in depth, because I mean, if we did get a massive oak tree came down on it,
Oh, yeah.
it would have brought the 66 down. Towers are entirely different, as you can probably imagine, because they're higher anyway than the trees. But if you want to come and chat to me afterwards, I can go through it. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
But also, for example, some of the BT towers are steel, and we lost 2 of those. Just because something is made larger and made of steel did not mean it survived in a particular way.
It's all about design.
Well, there's a fair point made. Do you guys want to come in at all? I mean, I'm utterly satisfied that there has been no storm like that for 40 years in this area, and on in no way do we consider this to be something that we accept as a regular occurrence. I don't think it is a regular occurrence either. It's just really simple. I don't care whether it is a serious flood like Storm Desmond, or whether it is a serious wind incident resulting in lack of power. I just want all of our parish halls and communities to be utterly ready for whatever comes their way. Frankly, I look at some of these storms in terms of snow. Beast from the east, I have communities that were cut off for 3 or 4 weeks, and in the 2011-12 snows, I got one particular farmer who was cut off for 6 weeks up near Rochester, and that's a long period of time, however much you may like beef. You know, I just, that is not acceptable, having somebody who may be vulnerable up in those areas without recourse to something locally. That's what we're trying to fix. David, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just quick, every comment you made is something that actually we looked at the review, and one of the actions in the Bayes report, it's a piece of work that's going to be quite long running, is to review the resilience standards to which we build our network. And at the moment there are certain thresholds around height. One of the issues we actually had, you did have the wind, absolutely right, just hit a pole from a different direction and it's just wiped it out. We did have some tree damage, but also what we had was quite a lot of ice secretion on cables. So that adds the weight, then the wind hits it, and it's just literally the perfect storm. The resilience standards are being reviewed, and literally all of those thresholds, what type of pole do you need at this kind of height, assuming this kind of wind, assuming this kind of ice secretion. So literally back to the point which I think you've hit the nail on the head, it comes down to design. And the very fundamentals with which we build our network are being reviewed at this very moment in time. So you're spot on, and you could have probably written that action for our report. So we're on.
There is if you look at the Bayes report and the regulators report, these guys have got to do stuff over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and we will hold them to account. Parliament holds them to account. Independent regulator holds them to account. Thank you. The other, I will finish on one thing though, which is also makes your argument in spades. There was a very nice gentleman who came along and sat in that seat last January and made the case that he had a particular power line in his farm that was dug up by rabbits for the last about 4 years and hadn't been inspected for about 10, and it fell over very, very, very easily. So there were definite examples of outlying poles that had just not been monitored in the right way. We are holding these guys to account, and they are doing an audit of pretty much everything to ensure that that is not happening.
And we've replaced that pole.
Okay. There's a farmer lived just in the valley, wasn't there?
Dennis. Yeah.
Dennis.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
It was just back on what the lady was saying before about digital voice solutions, and back to your point earlier about people taking a little bit more of their emergency box and candles things. You can get things for like £40, £50 called universal power supplies, uninterruptible power supplies, which basically you plug your router and your broadband ONT into, and they'll keep them running on a battery backup for a few hours. Obviously, if the main cabinet on the exchange goes down, it's not going to work because there's nothing coming in, but it can give you that bit extra buffer. If you've got no power at home, your broadband and your phone line would still work for a period of time, and about 50 quid or so plus on Amazon. There's different versions available. Again, something you can do yourself just to bolster.
What was it called?
To uninterruptible power supply, UPS.
You still need how to charge it every so
You basically plug it in all the time, so it lives between, you'll unplug your router, plug your router into this box, the box goes into the wall, it's constantly charged, and the power stops, it runs off the battery, and when the power comes back on, it charges again. So it'll last a certain amount of time.
for a whole week and a half.
Depends on the size you get. You can get really big ones that last a lot longer, but they're more expensive. But there are, like the guy was saying at the start, the things individuals can do to help themselves.
Yeah. There's also, you start from what is my backup energy supply, and then there's bits and bobs that can help you. Because obviously, if I run what he's describing of a backup generator and I can plug it in with the right connectors, I'm off and running. It's not perfect. Gentleman at that, yes.
This was an identical question to this gent, and he's answered it. So
Fine. Okay, we've got about another 15 minutes. Yes.
On backup supply,
Yes.
we're talking about generators and this data. Has innovation done anything about switch over to pre-existing solar power systems that may exist in houses and village halls and so on?
Yes is the answer, and there is quite a lot of, so there's a lot of stuff being done on this, because if I was I come from the school of really mucky old generators in the back of a garage or in a farmer's shed that everybody wheels out at difficult high days and holidays when things have gone wrong, and when you need to run your milking parlour or you need to run something. And lots of farmers have got those. Truth is, they need fairly regular maintenance, and although you ideally should start it on a fairly regular basis, so your solar and your batteries are ultimately, potentially, much better, and they're easy to look after, of which I know very little, but fortunately this man knows more.
Well, yes, we've got a range of different things, but one of the reasons we're quite keen that the solutions have got more sustainable for that reason, and exactly that reason. Generators are actually quite labour intensive to keep them in tip-top condition. But we also have a bunch of innovation projects running over at MPG, one of which is micro resilience, which is looking at how communities can become resilient through using existing low carbon technology and almost island themselves and work together. We're also looking at things like vehicle to grid, where you can run your house from your car if your car's charged and all that sort of stuff. So it's a rich vein of form. Again, perfect question, absolutely spot on, and it's a vein of thinking throughout our entire industry. And if you want more information, you can just drop us a note and put you in touch with someone who could boil your arm off on it.
But there's a serious point though, which is, so if you give me the Great Whittington example, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right on this. The Great Whittington, classic, old Victorian, stone, hopelessly inefficient village hall that has been there for a long period of time, that you wouldn't have any proper insulation if you threw a stick at it, you know? It's just the exact opposite of what you want. They have managed to put some solar onto it, and the bit they were trying to get was the battery capacity, and so they have got £4,000 effectively to take from their solar, which they've managed to get, to store some battery power, which will then get them through the particular difficult times. Now, we can have a discussion about net zero and long-term viability, but my strong advice, and where these guys are going as a power company, both for ethical reasons but also because it's better storage, is if you can go down the solar route and you have got the battery capacity, you've got to have a bit of space for all these things. It's actually doable. It's relatively cheap now. The days of it being 20, 30, 40,000 pounds are long gone. There is complications because all the kit's made in China, which is a great shame, and that it all comes from particular bits of stuff that the Chinese have control of, and that's just the way the world is right now. But the bottom line is that is a much better way forward for your very old village hall that was made by some lovely person using stone as thick as your thumb and is hopelessly inefficient. And it's probably better than the generator if you're thinking super long term. My gut feeling though is if you're thinking, I've got a village hall, I want to make sure it's ready to go this winter, a generator is cheap, easy, and you can crack on with it. But your long term proper solution is down the solar route, and yes, there is battery capacity there. Yeah, sure, come on.
Yeah. So just on the specific thing about solar, I was at an event day before yesterday, sorry, the week's running away from me, and there was a presentation from Community Action Northumberland. They have a whole project which is solar buildings, and there was a rep there from MPG, and my colleague from MPG was writing lots and lots of notes. So Community Action Northumberland they have already done a lot of work on this, and they're actually pretty good at it, I think. So they will, I think they're planning to be talking to our MPG colleagues about how they can get some money from you to get solar panels onto some of the community buildings, which would be a great way of joining things up, wouldn't it? So there is knowledge out there. There is knowledge out there looking at how you can apply this technology to communities as well. It's just about making sure that we're getting the right people in the right room to talk about this, which is why meetings like this are so important. And just that really micro example of somebody in the room sharing the knowledge about UPS with somebody else is a fantastic example of why that community resilience is so important. Because the skills and knowledge that you have in the community will be wide and varied. And it's no good me coming in and telling you how to do it because I don't know your community, and as I said earlier on, I know a little bit about a lot of different things. I might not have the knowledge that you need at any one time, but somebody else in the room might. And while the UPS might not be a perfect solution, it would give you the chance to ring somebody to tell us that there's a tree along your drive and we could go along and fix it. So it's about those tiny small changes that can just make your life a little bit better in a really nasty incident. And I think the point about comms is absolutely, it's key to a lot of this, but comms can be anything from a whiteboard outside of a community centre to a satellite phone. And it's understanding that variety and putting different solutions in place to address different needs. It's really high on my agenda. And I also agree that we should not be planning for the last war. So while we're talking about Storm Arwen and power outages, the preparations that you put in your community can be used for any disruptive event. And that's what I'm about. It's about what are the consequences that you might be facing as a community. How can I help you prepare for them? Myself and my team are quite happy to come out and talk to communities and talk to you about what it is that you want to do and how we can help frame that and maybe put you in touch with people that know more about particular things than we do. So more than happy to do that as well.
That's amazing. So, I mean, listen, we're preparing, in my view, for 4 particular things. We're preparing for loss of electric, we're preparing for snow and all of its consequences, we're preparing for floods, and we're also, putting it bluntly, preparing for war. Because all of these things, how you prepare your community for a disaster, basically. And are you match fit, ready to go? Very fair point made by Helen, which is usage of public spaces. So I'm a massive fan, having done this and going to the gentleman saying, how is it everybody's going to know that food's in the village? Every community has a parish notice board. Every community who has a village hall tends to have a sign outside the village hall. If you have a little sign saying, in the event of X, Y, Z, this is the following things for people to contact, these are the places you need to go to, massively helpful. The person who lives local to that particular sign knows that their job is to go, food will be coming on a particular time on this particular occasion. The other bit is going to Helen's point, which is every one of us will have seen the American cop shows and the American films where the suspect is offered a one phone call. I cannot overstate the importance of the one phone call to so many constituents at this last disaster. And the ability to phone for half an hour, just gold dust. Speaking to someone outside the area to say, we are trapped in, this is our situation, this is where we are. Secondly, I suspect everybody in my area is in the similar difficulty, and letting friends and family know that you are all right, but this is the situation, you will have no power for a period of time. And that network, establishing that network in that 20 to 30 minute window where you've got a backup phone is gold dust. And what was very clear is people literally would be out on the fields and would come back and they would find no power whatsoever for anything. And so suddenly they were genuinely cut off. How do we fix that? Their inability to make those 2 or 3 phone calls was really, really important. And because of course, no one had any information, no one had any communication, couldn't even speak to friends and family. We had huge issues in that. So I'm beginning to wrap up, partly because I want these guys to have an opportunity, if you want to speak to them and ask them questions of a more technical nature, pick up forms, understand how you get onto priority lists and things like that. But if anybody got any other questions, yes, you said I want your answer.
Just a quick one. I understand one of the problems with Bellingham was that it has basically a main supply source and there was no alternative. You couldn't switch to another circuit. Now, with building 100 more houses, is that going to be remedied?
You do have a main lane coming in, yeah. We have got that little bits that come in the bend, but do you mean just as the hill where you come in, those houses are being built?
Well, throughout Bellingham, we had no power.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to somebody, they said, oh, well, one of the problems was you've only got one main source coming in, and that's down, and we can't switch to any other circuit. There was no resilience in the system.
I don't think, we would have to go back to it. I mean, I don't know what we would do in ED2, but I don't think at the minute we've got another plan to bring another main lane into the village. That we call it the main lane. Is that what you?
Yes, so
you've only got one.
Yes.
There's three come in. I know where it was going on. We're watching the parish. The one comes in from Woodburn that feeds that side. It's the walk one that's the main of the village. There's one from Keeler that goes down as far as Riverdale. Yeah. So there is 3. So like you say, you can have lights on so far down the street, then it stopped, and that would go down, and that one came on, and you could see that if the 3 lines the way they were working. But they're not connected, like Terry says, they're not
I think there's a fair point to take away. There is a fair point to take away, which is you do have interconnections within the village, and genuinely, as the fair point was made, you lose one bit, and then you get the other bit was on, you lose another bit, other bit was on. I'm not quite sure how you are creating resilience between those 3 connections. And you might want to take away...
The network does adapt over time.
I don't think it happened on this occasion.
I mean, in the when I was on the computer all the time, you lost everything. So you lost every chance of coming in. That doesn't make any sense. So we had to build up as we went to get you back on. But you're not getting, are you sure you're going to get like a primary up here? Is that what you're looking at? Because there's not a plan for that.
No, I think the key point, no one is expecting, well, I don't think anyone is realistically expecting a brand new power line coming into Bellingham. What I do think you need to look at is the capacity of the 3 different supplies to either support each other or be much more interoperable going forward.
Can you patch it across if all of those
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
basically?
Well, we can't interconnect all the time. I mean, obviously,
Didn't happen last time. You might want to go in and
yeah, I mean, all
because you've got a lot of Bellingham Parish Council here who would really love to know where that is going forward.
I've got the system diagrams in the car if you want to look at them, you know.
We'll take it away.
Yeah, we'll take it away.
Okay, all right. So, any other questions? Because I'm then going to wrap it up and let these guys be available for specifics and ongoing questions. Can I hope, and here's my hope, there are representatives from at least 7 different parish councils or communities here, and a few more who arrived later on. I'm delighted that we've got Rochester over the line, and there are pending applications which will be very soon decided within 7 days. But please, get your application in. What my hope is, if your application is in soon, it will be certainly assessed by the 26th of November. That would be very cool if you could say to your community, within a year, we've got this. In some cases, it will actually be operable by that stage. That is what we are aiming for, and we're certainly hoping that everything will be operable by Christmas. And listen, this is an ongoing process, okay? It is not the case that this is a once and done situation. There is a variety of other funding. There is CAN, there's local authority, the power company. We are working together way, way, way better than ever before. You know, the expression is don't waste a good crisis. We wouldn't have wanted the crisis, but we're trying to ensure that we are an awful lot better prepared going forward. There is separate applications that can be made next year or bigger and better things, and certainly we are going to be an awful lot more resilient. The final bit I'm going to try and stress as well is that we talk about interoperability. So what is very clear in Arwen is that some particular communities and valleys had particular disasters. I could go 2 miles away and they were absolutely fine. Now, in a storm situation with snow, that's unlikely to be the case, but I know that, for example, in the West Allen Valley, that has a particular microclimate, which isn't on the East Allen Valley, and you can have 10 foot of snow there, but about a foot here, and they're about 1.5 miles apart. So where I really want to try and get to a situation is, yes, Bellingham will always be the hub of the North Tyne, of course it will be, but there are whole different bits around, and I want to be able to a situation that you're not just talking about how are we in Rochester or Kielder or wherever going to be able to cope, because we might actually be able to say, well, hang on a second, we know that there's perfectly good stuff, it's a little way away, but we know there's people who are qualified to sort these things, they're just down the road, which at the moment none of us know about. And making sure you're all connected, and then you actually have the phone number of XYZ and have the connections to those people, and that the local resilience forum know which halls will be open or not open, or those which are completely inundated with trees blocking everything. So that's the bit going forward which we all want to do, which slightly means you've got to talk to your neighbours. And so the hope is you will all be part of a much greater network of connections that will help you all, and the sum of our parts is much better than the individual, as we all know. All right? Can I thank very much? These guys have decided what they really want to do with the Friday night is to come out and receive a grilling from all of you, and they're going to stick around for half an hour. Helen, obviously, she loves coming out and explaining what the County Council are doing. My team are doing this. If you can't remember any bits and you want to watch it again, this will be on my website, again, like all the meetings from last year, which you can watch back if you're particularly interested or basically need to get to sleep and a bit bored. There is an opportunity as well that we will continue to navigate people through. Please tell your friends and colleagues who are on other councils, because the legitimate criticism is, even though it's been in the Hexham Cramp for the last 3 weeks, even though I've done TV, radio and lots of promotions about this, even though it's on all of my social media and everything else, and we've run virtually every parish council that we could get a number of, plenty of people didn't know about it till today. Plenty of people are not here today, and you'll be thinking, well, where is X from the nearby council? Please tell them. It's all on my website, but it's also, there's plenty of ways you can find this out, and we would be very happy to help and navigate anybody through it. Can I thank you all for coming out? And sorry, Susanna.
I would also say, because obviously we've done this process with you, if anybody needs any help, David and I will just a phone call or an email away.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.